Please welcome to High Performance, Karl Lokko.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Top man.
Based on what you know now, what do you consider to be high performance?
High performance. I think firstly to start, it's relative. I think it's down to wherever someone is at and basically pushing that a few dials beyond their quote unquote norm. You know, so, I mean, if they're a 2 at that thing, getting it to a 5, I reckon for them that is high performance. But if you're naturally a 5 at it, you need to get it to 7 for it to kind of define itself as high. So yeah, I think it's all relative essentially.
Let's go right back then to the days when you were not just in a gang on the streets around where you lived, but you were the gang leader. At the very height and the depth of your involvement with gangs, what then did you consider to be high performance?
Exact same definition. Yeah. When I was performing.
And you saw being in a gang as a form of performance, of wanting
Absolutely.
to be the elite, the best?
Absolutely. I mean, coming from a community where those that are able to drive German cars and wear Italian clothes and go to tropical destinations are those that are doing it illegitimately. I mean, it did kind of put across the message that if you wanted to, you know, enjoy the finer things or better yourself, that was the vehicle to do so, you know, and like anything, you can either do it poorly or you can do it well, you know, so the aim was obviously always to do it well.
To do what well, though?
I mean, whatever, like, the day entailed, you know, kind of like, whether that be huddling and kind of like holding together I'm holding down my peers, whether that be what we do to earn, you know, in terms of like, you know, you can get creative, you know, the rest of it. I mean, just doing it all well. And obviously it's an environment where it's quite fast paced. You know, a lot can change and a lot becomes redundant very quickly. You think the fashion world's got to turn around. It's nothing like the streets, you know.
Give us an example of that.
I mean, you could be feared like first quarter of like, I don't know, 2021. And then like it has like a COVID impact and everything has turned around and you are now like being victimized, you know, at the end of the year, you know, just because you took what we call maybe a few L's.
What would that be?
You know, I mean, maybe being ridiculed in a certain way, humiliated, you know, shown to, you know, exhibit a certain level of weakness, you know, so yeah.
But you've described yourself, Karl, that you were wearing a bulletproof vest,
Yeah,
as a norm. So where were you wearing it? In what kind of fields did it
Would I wear
require
the
to
vest?
wear that vest? That meant what kind of? Well, where were you making your money? In what drugs?
I mean, do you know what? In regards to actually wearing the vest and where I would wear it, I mean, I actually wanted to wear it at home as well as outside the home. There was one instance where a young man in Peckham was actually shot while asleep in his bed with a semi-automatic gun. So, I mean, these stories are, you know, it transmutes the trauma, you know, because that's just literally, what, a 10-minute bus journey up the road, you know. So, I mean, from my home to my estate to where I went around, anywhere I was, I wanted the vest. And if you, your second question was around...
What were you trading in? Was it guns? Was it drugs? Was it like what sort of
definitely
criminal activity?
like both, like drugs, guns, for sure.
I really want to give people an idea of how this all happened, because I've heard you say that you were a hardworking kid at school. You came from a loving family. Your parents were immigrants who came to the UK to find a better life for you and your brother and your family. So how do you go from there to being not just in a gang, but to being the main guy?
I mean, there's a few answers I can provide, but I mean, ambition is one of the main answers, actually.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely, ambition. So initially, like when I was about 9 years old, I wanted to be an astronaut. 10, a veterinary surgeon. 11, 11, I wanted to be a forensic pathologist because my father was heavy into murder detective shows. And then literally, I always say about 12 and a half, I wanted to be the most notorious kind of street level gang member. And that sort of dark evolution is really spurred by what's happening around you. Like just the rate of which is quite exponential if you think about a forensic pathologist so that shows it's like an external sort of contamination, is what I was being exposed to. I actually witnessed someone being shot at very close range, and the trauma of that was both traumatic and romantic at the same time, so at that time there, a young man in my area, his father was actually murdered over a PlayStation game, and this young man was a friend of mine. And the young men that were doing certain things in that area had also attempted to steal games from my house at one point. So my mind kept on thinking, you know what, that could have been my father, might be my father next. My mother's car was being broken into continually. My brother, I would have to kind of gauge by how he knocked on the door whether he was being pursued. Sometimes you want to knock on the door, but not too hard that you knock the door and then make them be annoyed that you were knocking the door so hard because even they knew their intentions and you're going to face them tomorrow, if that makes any sense.
It
so
does.
I have to gauge, yeah.
And it does, and I get the trauma bit,
yeah.
But where's the romantic bit of that?
The romantic bit comes from when you're living in an environment where it's kind of plagued with powerlessness. Not having enough, not being able to do enough. Also, being the son of previously what was illegal immigrants, not being able to tread the ground in a certain way, always trying to be seen and not heard. And just feeling, powerlessness is the best way to describe it. When you see someone act in certain ways, even though it may, on the surface, is brutal, it actually can be interpreted as powerful. So you can start to feel like maybe you're reclaiming some level of power now. You know what, maybe I do have autonomy over my own situation. Maybe I'm not just, caught in the winds of peril, and lack,
So was it about power for you? I know you got arrested, didn't you, in front of your classmates?
Yeah.
I'm sure in a strange way that gave you even more of a sense of power, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It was definitely about power for me, but in a way that I constantly felt powerless. I just didn't feel like I could use my own agency to change our situation. And the only way that I was able to do so was by using the vehicle of gangsterism, because on a short, term level, it worked. It was very effective. My mother's car went from being broken into to young men helping her over shopping up the stairs. My brother went from having to bang the door in a certain way for me to open it quickly to being able to tell other young men to leave people alone because they know that he's my brother. He has that jurisdiction now. I no longer had that anxiety that my father might be next. And that in itself kind of helped with a level of peace, even though it's a whack trade-off, but still for a period, it seemed to help, So definitely I felt like it was an antidote to most things.
And what did your parents make of this? Because they must have seen that there was a very different treatment and wondered why that was happening. Were they aware of what you were doing?
Yes and no. Initially, I'll say a lot more no than yes. I was still, my parents perceived that like yourself, actually. They had quite a skewed understanding of what it meant to be a gang member or involved in gangsterism. So they kind of thought, we're brilliant present parents, we're loving. Our child is in the top set for every class. He's year 9 SATs in year 6. He's been diagnosed a child genius. We're definitely on the right track, he's still very courteous, still very polite, got lots of manners, when he comes home, he doesn't engage with us as a gang member, still engages with us as our son. So I didn't think I had subscribed to anything else. But those little telltale signs here and there, but I was able to kind of speak my way out of that to a period and to a point. And then eventually, even I had to let them know that this is what it is for all our safety.
But what you're describing there, Karl, is like many parents that will be listening to this, almost like their worst nightmare, that you think you're doing a good job and you think you're raising your children to be polite and respectful and work hard at school. And yet, when they leave the house, you've got no idea what they're doing. What message would you offer to any parent? Like, what should we be looking for with our children that maybe would have given away some of the signs?
Do you know what? I don't think it can be purely on observation. I think this is more around conversation and not interrogation at that, but like genuine conversation, and if a child feels like they are able to share even the bits that might make them feel shame, or they might feel like, mommy or daddy might not be too happy, but still they have an opportunity and the space to share, and it's safe and they feel safe, because it's different to feel safe in terms of, those are your guardians, but to feel safe to bring them, certain conundrums and certain things that's going on, that takes a next kind of work, which I believe needs to be intentional. So I feel like that's the only way. But in terms of observation, the game will be how good are you at looking and how good are they at hiding. So
you were kind of, to use a daft analogy, you were like Spider-Man. You leave the house, the mask goes on, you're one person, you come home, you whip it off, you're someone totally different.
Not a daft analogy, that's exactly it. Absolutely. In my TED Talk, I actually use that. I literally say each day I left the house, I'd put on a mask. And then when I come home, the mask is redundant, so I took it off.
Was it exhausting?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But I mean, you don't really get to, it's only now when you look back, I realize how exhausting it was, because that's all that I didn't know any different, so I acclimatized to an extent, but it's definitely very heavy.
What I find really interesting is that you weren't just a gang member, right? You were a gang leader. And you talk about, being diagnosed or being considered a child genius, sitting your exams earlier than everybody else, your mum and dad holding you up as like this amazing son of ours who's going to change the fortunes of this family. Have you considered that perhaps the things that helped you in the classroom to excel were the very same things that helped you excel in gang culture? Like, you had the drive and the ambition, as wrong as that word feels like using, the ambition to be the leader in the gang.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it's like most skills, it's transferable.
What did you do then to become the leader?
I mean, it's going to sound a bit, I showed love. Sounds like, I mean, it may not be the sexiest thing, but it's the truth. I showed love. I showed love to those who were in a similar limbo to myself. We were neither here nor there, but we kind of had enough and didn't want to live like in fear every day. So we banded together, and we were a little bit less scared together. Then I kind of began to whisper to them the prospect of maybe we don't have to just be even a little bit less scared. Maybe we don't have to be scared full stop. Maybe they can be scared of us, And then literally that's how it started to move, because the best defense is offense, So
how did you manage fear then? So when somebody's pulling a gun on you, or you're hearing about somebody being shot for a PlayStation game, how did you process and then manage that fear?
Yeah, I mean, I leaned into it. Like, I was very frightened. Like, I had even night terrors. Like, at night to sleep on my own with the lights off, I am petrified. I mean, I will take the long way home, wait for, like, I didn't want to ride the bike my parents bought me. I'll be, like, people tried to mug me. I'll be punched. I was being chased a lot. Like, I was scared every single day, and I realized that courage was in the absence of that thing we were calling fear. Like, it was just what you do with it. So I just put fear in my pocket and do what wasn't kind of like supposed to happen, So what the fear would stop me from doing, once I put it in my pocket, I was able to do it, but I was still afraid, I just kept on practicing that. So then they'll be like, all right, give me your phone. And I'm terrified. And I'll be like, no, I'm not giving you my phone. And then they'll be like, what do you mean you're not giving it? And I said, no, you're not getting my phone. And then literally will be like, all right, what do we do here? And it might not even be so successful. They might even get the phone at the end, but I practiced it and I just kept on practicing it. And it was almost like a muscle. Eventually, I got to a point where I got a lot of my kind of notoriety for being fearless. Mine wasn't about like the amount of violence I perpetrated or about the amount of money I made. That's not why I got my notoriety. I got my notoriety from being considered fearless.
So give us the most extreme example that we could understand of where you...
Of fearless.
Of that, what that fearlessness looked like.
I mean, like this knife wound that I got on my face, like I knew he had a knife, I would still fight. I fought him with my fist, you know, while he had a knife. You know, that was quite like, I did that quite regularly on things like situations like that. So I won't run if I'm outnumbered.
But is that not recklessness or stupidity rather than fearlessness?
It is, but I mean, everything is, you know, until you pull it off. You know, it's all reckless and stupid until it lands. You know, so the fact that I landed it, it was then...
Yeah, but you're not... But what intrigues me is you were a child genius. You're not stupid.
Yeah.
So the clever thing in that situation is find a way out of it, talk your way out of it. But to go and have a fist fight with a knife fight...
It seems like that. But then what happens is that you actually end up kind of... You magnetize more misfortune when you cower.
Yeah.
So the less you cower, it's a weird equation, but then the less those situations kind of gravitate towards you because people kind of figure you one not to mess with, you know? So by using kind of like extreme situations where you're able to exhibit the fact that you are actually like not afraid, you know, everyone kind of knows you for that and they tend to not kind of deal with you a certain way. There's a Jamaican saying that Duppy know who to frighten. And Duppy's basically like ghosts, you know, it knows who to go boo to. If you're not afraid, they tend to leave you alone. And that was...
See, but I'd imagine, and this is probably coming from a different perspective, that it just increases the size of the target on your back. Because there's always somebody then that goes, I'll take him down because I want to be the king of the hill.
I mean, this is something that I later realized, but these were later revelations. So it kind of goes through these sort of curves on the graph, you know. Initially, it gave me a level of immunity. It was like everyone knew that you don't really pick on me because if you pick on me, all my friends, I'm going to stick up for it. And like you might be embarrassed. You might have wanted to kind of get some sort, and then you might end up with humiliation. So they just be like, all right, I'd rather not. There's too much of a risky venture there, you know? So as my notoriety grew, you're right, it made me more visible. And then other players began to then see me in a certain way. And that's why you just you try at least to continually perform highly and make sure that they don't kind of like, you don't exhibit any kind of weakness in that way. But I was very fortunate. Like I don't say it in a way like it's not a science. You know, as you're saying, 1 + 1 = 2. You know, if I went against a knife, the reality is that I should have got a lot more than 2 kind of like incisions here and there. You know, like I've been shot at more times than I had birthday parties. I tend to turn to flight men that's even come at me with firearms. You know, and there's something weird about it. I mean, I watched something on YouTube years ago. It never left me, but I was like, that's the closest thing to what I was putting off sometimes. And it's about these guys in Nairobi that just literally wake up and take the lion's supper. Like there's a whole tribe of lions and it doesn't make any sense because technically the lions should be putting them to flight because they're the apex in that situation. However, just with formation and a kind of like a certain level of kind of like doggedness, for some reason it just causes them to retreat. And I saw that a fair bit. But again, I was very lucky.
But was there ever moments that, you know, like you've escaped a bullet, you've escaped a more serious knife injury that I get the idea of showing face in front of a wider group of people, but when you go home at night and you that quiet moment where you're in your bedroom, where did the fear come in then? How did you process this and deal with it?
I think it was playing out in the hyper performance. I think it was actually my fear was actually playing out in how much I was presenting fearlessness. I don't think it was ever a non-factor. You know, I don't feel like there was ever a time like I put down the fear and had to pick it up like maybe at night where I'm thinking, blimmin' heck, like, look, the day was scary. I think I was constantly scared. Actually, I know I was constantly scared. I just got to a point where I never exhibited that fear and I knew how to maneuver with it, but I was always scared. Like, I was definitely frightened.
The big juxtaposition here for me is like, you are such a bright and eloquent person. The way you talk about what you went through, the fact that you rose to the top of the gang using love, I think that's an amazing revelation. And I think that should be really educational for a lot of people listening to this, that think that the whole thing about gang culture is hatred and anger. It is, and part of the reason you're in that gang is the love for and the desire to stay alive effectively. But at the same time, despite the fact that you were this incredibly bright guy as you are now, you just valued life, I guess, as worthless, because you were looking to take someone's life, they were looking to take your life. You existed in a world where you could be killed, as you said, over a PlayStation game.
Yeah.
It's so not you, though, is it? Were you in the real depth of this?
Yeah.
Were you aware that, like, this is not you? Or were you so in it you couldn't see that anymore?
Do you know what it is? Initially, I knew it wasn't me. Like, every single day, it was, I had to molest myself. I had to massage this facade, into place. And it was actually quite painful initially. But I mean, like anything, like acclimatization is a real thing. You do something long enough, consistently enough, you will become it, So I embodied it, but yeah, no, it was a tough gig. When you look back on it, at the time everything's going on, so you don't really get to breathe. There's not much time for meditation, You're not getting into a kind of Zen space where you're able to really see what's happening. But the value for life, my own and others included, definitely it deteriorated, to a point where, I mean, the splitting effect is brilliant for that. You could split even the splitting effect of my own self, because I was going by my alias. I mean, I don't think it was so much Karl that I didn't value. It was more Locks I didn't value, is what they used to call me, and I feel like it's also with the split effect and us and them, like, unless you kind of demonize the other, you can't move against them in a certain way, but we do that with almost everything today. That's why prejudice is at an all-time high, because we really are good at saying them and other,
Is there anything left of Locks now?
Absolutely. This is just Locks 4.0, but without the Locks, just Karl 4.0.
So what's left of the Locks that was on the streets in those days?
I got hypervigilant still, like I can't help but watch everything, so I get more from maybe grooves by a lip and an eye than I do maybe conversation, because I've had to learn to read very quickly in very, sketchy and real scenarios. I mean, also some of the revelations I came to on a street level that, I mean, there's better ways of coming to those realizations, but I mean, I was fortunate enough to live through that.
Can you share some of the revelations?
I mean, that everybody's human. One of my things that's really kind of given my overall social mobility, or I don't know, being kind of well networked, or my progression and what, is because I humanize everyone. Because the streets lets you know people are very human, very, very human. So I struggle to be starstruck. I struggle to be kind of intimidated by someone that I know, like, is just a person. Because everyone's just people, at the end of the day. So the streets really highlight that, though. Yeah.
What about your ability to see through other people's masks?
I mean, I think it was chicken, just playing that game. Like, I had a mask on, they had a mask on, and then we just see whose mask is, fastened, harder, essentially. So I feel like just kind of being in those scenarios really got me to really be aware that everyone's kind of like presenting a certain face, that necessarily might not be their face.
So what were the best tells that you spotted then?
I think it's mainly around the voice. I think certain octaves in there that I kind of got sensitive to. You know, I think the voice don't lie. You know, majority of things your face can do, certain things you can even your physiology, you can kind of put it in a certain way, but it's kind of harder to control the voice in unless you are actually. So there's a way that I was able to.
So someone could be telling you one thing, and you're looking at them thinking your voice tells me something totally different.
Absolutely.
It's an incredible study of people, isn't it? That I don't think anyone appreciates when it. I mean, you know, life and death is on the line.
Yeah.
Right. So you're looking for every possible percent to get one over somebody else, and it's come down to the finest of margins, which I guess over the years actually kept you alive.
Yeah, absolutely, and lends to me today in a huge way, for sure.
So if we can move on to the Karl today that sat here, I think the bit that's fascinating in your journey is that transition, that change. And when I was reading your story, Karl, I was reminded of the change equation that's often used in business, but can be used in personal transitions. Of the change equation says that there's almost like a formula that we have to have dissatisfaction with where we are, the status quo.
Yeah.
We have to have a vision of where we want to go to instead, what the alternative could be. And then we have to know what our first step we can take towards that is.
Yeah.
And if you get those three things right, that's enough to overcome the resistance of being stuck in those old patterns.
Yeah.
So if we can, I'd like to talk about the change that you underwent through those three things. So what was the dissatisfaction element of your life?
And which change are we talking about? Into gangsterism or out of gangsterism?
Out of gangsterism.
Out of gangsterism. The dissatisfaction actually came when my definition of winning changed. At one point, as I said about high performance, I actually thought we were winning. This is the cards we've been dealt. This is the best. Has been presented to us. You know, so for a very long time, I believed that what the rest of the mainstream would kind of define as losing, as like loss as gain. Like it was that skewed, you know. So I got really dissatisfied with losing. I don't really lose often. I don't like to lose. I don't even play games for that. I don't want it to enter my inner matrix at all. Like my friends will tell you, I'm a complete weirdo in that regard. I just don't like having references to losing.
So what did the definition become then?
The definition of, it was basically opposites, you know. So whereas it was quite like, you know, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, you know, essentially. So the exact same actions, but your interpretation of it. Like I'm like, all right, cool. You went to maybe defend the quote unquote block, and then now you've been arrested and sentenced, incarcerated to X amount of years. But you that was honorable. Like you did what you needed to do to protect us, to protect you and yours. I'm like, big, massive respect. That's worthy, you know, worth the time, you know, of value, you know. And I started to see that as a complete waste of bravery. Like this is a complete squander. You're sat down now doing absolutely nothing when, you know, you could be contributing in a certain way, and what to defend the council estate that our parents still have to pay council tax for, and technically, like, you know, they don't even come and fix the sewers. It smells of sewage, you know, but like here we are creating these grand fantasies about what it is. And desperation does that. Exclusion does that. You know, you begin to kind of fabricate certain things, you know, but that fabrication became unwoven. And I knew that was losing. I just didn't want to lose no more. So that was the dissatisfaction.
So we've spoken a lot about, you know, bravery when you're involved in gangsterism.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the bravery of getting out. How on earth do you take the very first step to walk away from this life that you are absolutely wrapped up in?
Yeah. I wish I could say a way mitigating risk. There was none. Like entering, like was risky. Leaving was also risky. You know, I had a huge faith element which helped me, you know. So I was like, you know, I would rather live and go in this way.
You mean die?
Yeah. Than to live and stay.
So you'd
in this
rather have
capacity.
tried to leave gangsterism and been
then-
killed than remain a gangster
Yeah,
for the rest of your life. So I know there was a really important person in this whole equation, Pastor Mimi, and she's definitely part of this conversation. But what's the first thing you do for people that are listening to this? And you know, there will be people listening to this actually who find themselves in not dissimilar situations to where you were at. What was the very first thing that you did to start this process?
I think the very first thing I did was tell those around me exactly what I'm about to do and what I'm not about to do anymore. So that was a significant.
That's difficult
move.
for your fellow gang members though, because that's then a threat, right?
Do you know what? Remember, it's all around let's take the concept. Let's say, imagine I actually pull this together through love. Yeah? Like, it's a threat and it's not a threat because we've loved on each other in a certain way and our expression of love has been quite skewed and, you know, perverted. But ultimately, at its essence, that's what it's been. It's been, I am my brother's keeper, you know? So essentially, they knew I was doing what I was doing for them out of love. So I came and approached them and spoke to them also out of love and said, listen, the police, they called me on the first name basis. They stopped my father and they'll be like, and they'll tell him about his son, you know, like they got my picture in the station. Like they told me to stop. I never stopped. You know, my mother who kind of carried me 9 months, 10 months, like gave birth to me, clothed me. She begged me to stop. I never stopped, you know, but for this is for me. I just don't believe in it no more. It's not true.
What was their reaction though?
I mean, they were very supportive. I mean, I know they want to paint it out. They would rather I said something different, but
No,
they were.
not.
Yeah, no. I mean, when I say they, it's like DJ Khaled Day. It's like they don't want us to win. You know, it's always they who is actually they. But I mean, like, yeah, that's just the reality. Like, they were really supportive. You know, initially, then they began to account for the loss that I was. You know, and then in the weakness it may have articulated to those that we were at loggerheads with. That's when it began to become a bit of an issue, and I could tell that there was some slight resentment, you know. But other than that, initially when I told them about it, and said, I mean, everyone was on board, you know. And even when it went through that kind of like trough, you know, I was still able to kind of speak to them, and they spoke to me, and they were quite like honest with me, you know. But I mean, you can't please everybody, but I'll say the majority was really happy for me.
So was there ever an incident then where you thought, almost like a victimless crime, for example, where you know you could have done it and still was, so you could have gone back, earned yourself some money, and then still gone back on that path?
Plenty.
So how did you resist that then?
How did I resist that? Because I connected my exodus to all of theirs. I couldn't do it for just me. Like, from being honest. But me thinking that me breaking away is going to give them, I'll be a living epistle for it being possible. You know, they'll be able to draw inspiration and maybe even take direction from it. I mean, the prospect of that motivated me. So even when I knew, you know, because I still had that agility, you know, I'd spent years developing that. So I needed certain things from time to time, but I always kind of thought that might be a point of contact for them to no longer believe or no longer attempt. So as a result,
Which sounds very much like the vision bit. You had a vision of what you wanted to be instead, so on that change equation. So let's talk about Pastor Mimi then, because from what I understand, the questions she was asking were forcing you to think very much around your identity of who you wanted to be.
Absolutely.
Tell us a bit about it.
Pastor Mimi has this amazing way of not identifying someone by what they do. Like, she genuinely, like, it goes over her head. Like, it's like, he asks, like, oh, introduce yourself, and then you say what you do. She's like, but that's, I mean, who am I meeting? That's you at work or you in that capacity, you know? So she had this stance that she never actually flinched from. It was unflinching. She would say, you aren't a gang member. You are a young man that has embraced gangsterism. It's an ism that you've embraced. If you let go of that ism, you will realize you are not that thing and people will judge you by that ism. But that's literally an ideology. That is not who you are, you know? So she kind of made me see it as something that at one point I'd like kind of identified that I am X, I am Y. But she's let me know I am carrying X.
That must have been so powerful for you to hear that, because you want out, you want this exit. But part of the fear is, well, how can I exit something if I am that thing?
This is it.
And suddenly she's telling you that you're not the thing.
She's telling me I thought I was a demon, but I'm not. You know, so I'm like, flipping heck. So maybe we can, all dogs do go to heaven.
And I think, let's be clear for people listening to this, that, you know, Pastor Mimi wasn't, you know, some out of touch local pastor that had no understanding of your life and of gang culture. You know, she was in her own way immersed in the world that you were immersed in.
She
right?
got immersed in it. Initially, she was the equivalent of like being, I mean, the furthest thing from it, like my parents, you know, not having that understanding, thinking that maybe we're stealing mobile phones. When we definitely, like, that was like a whole maybe 7 years ago. You know, we had definitely gone on to, I don't know, I'm going to call it greener pastures, or maybe not so greener pastures, you know. So literally, like, she ended up biting off more than she can chew and just chewed it anyway, you know. But she did have that drive that she wanted to save her son also.
He was in the gang.
Yeah, he was involved with me, my right-hand man. And yeah, essentially, she just gave a damn, gave it her all, gave up her time and made it happen without no government funding, no real government assistance at all. You know, just kind of just opened up her home and made it happen.
See, what you're describing here is the work, it's very similar to the work of a guy called James March, who was a political scientist that looked at how voters voted. So traditionally people think people vote for cost versus benefit. I'll vote for them that save me the biggest taxes. And what he found is the vast majority of voters vote for identity. And the identity is 3 questions. Who am I? What's this situation? And what would somebody like me now do in this situation? So I'd be interested to explore this with you, Karl. So before you went to Pastor Mimi and decided this was a life you wanted to get out of, in a situation where you're on the streets and somebody disrespects you, how would you have answered those 3 questions? Who am I? What's the situation? What would I do?
Again, this is why I'm convinced I was always scared, because it was quite delusional as to who, like, if I like was to give my valid answer at that point, the reason why I would turn to flight, maybe 20 young men, you know, on my own, is because I'm operating under a level of delusion. I would literally think I am I don't know, almost like a demigod. Like, literally, it's like I am a street king. Like, I am council estate royalty. I am like Brixton's baddest. I am the absolute, there's no one beyond, further, bigger, more able, you know. So if you're asking, that was kind of like what I would like, that would be my answer at that time, like if you asked me.
So
yeah.
Today,
yeah,
what would your answer to those 3 questions be now?
Do you know what? Good question. Because there's still a level of delusion, for sure. Otherwise, I won't be able to pull off what I'm pulling off all the time. But my answer now would be, if it's in front of me.
Who am I? What's the situation? What would I do now?
I still have this ability angle. So I always feel like I am able. So the moments like a situation comes and kind of says contrary, I kind of present myself as I am able. like almost like my name is able. Like I am actually able, so I still have that, but in a certain way. So yeah, I'm able.
This whole thing though, I think it comes back to education. 99% of people are judging the life that you lived in that gang from the outside with no knowledge or understanding. They don't realise that you got to the top through love. They don't realise you managed to exit through using love. It was only when Pastor Mimi embraced that gang culture life, she was able to see this. And there's an absolute recurring theme here, isn't there? That the reason why you excelled at school was because you were the kind of person that wanted to excel. You excelled in the gang because you wanted to excel. You're excelling now in your business ventures and all the things you've done, and you've raised tens of different hundreds of thousands of pounds for charity because you want to excel. But what you and everyone else needs to realise is that we're all wearing a mask all the time.
Yeah.
I'm wearing a mask when I sit here and pretend I've got decent questions.
Yeah.
Damian wears a mask when he stands up in front of students at a university and lectures to them.
Yeah.
All of us are wearing a mask
Absolutely.
all of the time, but none of us put any value or credit in trying to understand why someone is wearing that mask. And that's why this conversation around gang culture is wrong all the time. We just believe they're bad people. And as we're talking about here, they are generally good people in bad situations.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what should we be doing now to change gang culture today? You turn on the news and it's, absent parents, wrong. It's grime music, wrong. Yeah. It's because they're bored, wrong. Yeah. What should be our message from this podcast to people that are going down the wrong path? Because there's gangs in every town and every city in this country.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I feel like it is more a collective move and a collective effort, yeah? And that collective move and collective effort needs to be towards inclusion. So, like they did a study several years ago in Saudi Arabia, and they were trying to work out what the correlation between those who had been kind of picked up as extremists and they all seem to have engineering degrees. And they're like, what's going on? Like, what's in the engineering degree water, So essentially with a bit of probing, they realized that basically SA had put a call out to the nation and said, listen, and obviously it being Saudi Arabia, most young men answered that call saying, we need engineers. We are pushing forward the vision of this country, blah, 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 blah. So they all kind of responded to that call. And in their response to that call, actually, when it was time to actually give the jobs, it was then outsourced to the UK and US engineers. And then a lot of them felt jilted. A lot of them felt displaced. A lot of them felt resentment. A lot of them felt angry. So they ended up being more vulnerable to indoctrination and subscribed. If we're talking about the subscription, exclusion is what will cause a person to subscribe to a way of being that is technically not with the direction of the mainstream or even seen as something that is pleasant, because they genuinely feel as if they have been excluded from the option that is available to everyone else. So for me, it's around an inclusion that needs to happen across the board, and that's not just in terms of what region or socio-economic situation or race or gender or disability. I'm diagnosed NHS as with a disability. I'm heavily dyspraxic. I have to put my finger down in a certain way to be able to not drop and crack the glass, just put it on the table, but most, so diversity exists. I just feel as if it needs to be acknowledged that there is a case to diversify, which is not only economic, but for the betterment of basically doing away with some of these sub-pockets in our society, So for me, it would be an overall kind of message of collective effort towards a collective destiny, which means that all should be allowed to partake in the collective. So, and there's not one bit of that I disagree with.
Yeah. I like the point you were making earlier about the dehumanization of people.
Yeah.
They, them,
yeah,
creates division because you don't see them as the same.
Mm-hmm.
For anyone listening to this, though, that Because there's so many things that relate to not just society, to culture, to relationships in a classroom or wherever. What's the one thing that anyone listening to this, Karl, can do to take that first step towards the kind of society that you describe?
Yeah. I mean, it is the quote will have to be it. The quote is the answer. Honestly.
Empathy, not opinion.
Not opinion. It's the highest. Like when I heard that struck, like I'm like, eliminate, because what happens is that people don't realize the other exists no matter what your lens is. So for me, initially the other was those from Uptown. I was like, I went uptown on a mercenary mission to bring resources downtown. I went there expecting to meet people with webbed feet that bleed purple, that literally, like, that was what I was going into. Alien territory is definitely them. And I went in there with that opinion. So everything I'm seeing, I'm kind of picking up, when you buy the car and now you see that car everywhere. I mean, it's my bias, all of these things that's just in operation. So as a result, it just continued to kind of drive a wedge until I had a real human connection with someone from Uptown. And I'm like, you guys are human. Like, regardless of whether I'm listening to X and you're listening to Y, in terms of song choice, you're human. Like, I might spend my Saturday here, you spend your Saturday there, but we all are spending our Saturday like here on God's green earth because we are human. And when I really, really got that, I was able to move in that. And by moving in that, that's what actually got me really well, like kind of raptured. I always describe it as being raptured into the 0.01% of London. But it wasn't a complete rapture. It was that same kind of like human connection, love ticket, where I'm like, all right, you're a person, I see you, you see me, and we're seen. And if everyone does that, like some people are able to do it on a micro level, some on a macro. It all depends on what your station and status is. And ultimately, I don't even believe in micro and macro because I'm a firm believer in the chaos theory and butterfly effect, and that small things can have great ramifications. So ultimately, you don't even know who is going to receive that message, who they're going to go on to become, how it's going to affect someone's day. So I feel like if we all genuinely move away from opinion and move closer to empathy in terms of, and then we actually start to think, because the other stuff ain't thinking. And it's easy to judge and hold an opinion that you know nothing on.
And then it comes down to action as well.
Yeah.
So as we sit here talking today, you're a father. We'll talk about your business interests in a minute.
Yeah.
Are you now Pastor Mimi for other people who are in a place where you once were, bearing in mind you have all the empathy in the world with the story and the situation that they're in? Yeah,
I feel like at one point, as I'm constantly reiterating, like everyone else, so like I think I mentioned, I said I'm like, Karl Lokko 4.0. If I'm being honest, probably 6.0 now, So like for me, I am that to someone else in a certain way. But then I'm like, even maybe that's not enough because I'm like, they need to see something else. And that's why I'm now making sure I embody certain elements that they can draw inspiration from ultimately. My whole game is about mobilization.
Talk to us about that, because it comes back to this great phrase, if you can see it, then you can be it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what do you want to be seen as today?
I want to be seen as able. It sounds like, but able to do, like, for example, majority of like, there's particular industries that they say that someone who's maybe melanated or darker skinned can enter and thrive in. I am able to do whatever industry, like I have a passion for, a desire, or like I can gain the insights for, I can go there, so even in my current industry, which is venture capitalism, a big thing is because there's no other first-time fund managers that look like me in terms of like, or like literally have some that look like me, but not really. Maybe I could count them on one hand, in the entire United Kingdom, and then maybe in terms of having the thesis that we have, there's none other, so for me, I just like to trespass that. I'm like, we are trespassing. Yeah, I am able.
Do you still feel like you're trespassing in that world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I am definitely considered by some when I enter other. because I didn't got come on, the majority of venture capital funding goes to 80% or so goes to 1% of the country, which is Oxbridge graduates. I'm not an Oxbridge graduate, so definitely there is a level of trespassing for sure. Yeah.
Which in 2022 feels like a madness, we're
crazy.
All parents. I mean, you've got a 3-year-old now, haven't you? And if there's one thing we just want equality, right?
Absolutely.
We want our kids to just grow up with every possibility that every other young child has.
Absolutely.
And you've spoken about Brixton becoming sort of the Black Silicon Valley, is that right?
Yeah.
Just tell us what you want that to do for young people. Here's a question, right?
Go for it.
You're an all-in kind of person, right? So you were all into school, all into gang culture, all into getting out. Now you're all into business.
Yeah.
What is your dream for Brixton in 10 years' time from now?
Yeah. My dream for Brixton. Brixton is actually a great case study. Yeah. Brixton is almost the kind of it can be sad, but it's not sad because we're going to control the narrative and it won't be a sad story, but it's prime for it. Yeah. It had what we would call huge Afro-Caribbean ley lines and still does, of which, there's certain sayings, if there's blood on the ground, you buy that, and essentially we kind of know then the creatives move in because it's edgy, and then this group moves in, and then the yuppies move in because it's, and then now the Starbucks, and then we can kind of see the engineering of sorts. And for me, there's nothing wrong with that as long as people aren't displaced in the process. But currently there is still, because we're going by a certain approach, there are people being displaced, and it's happening implicitly and explicitly. Yeah. The prices, more disposable income moves into the area, more people will kind of increase the prices of what it is. What was considered, to be a no-go area is now prime real estate. You get foreign kind of buyers from, China or Emirates has never seen or stepped foot into the area and they own the building essentially, so and then they say there's a quota of 5% that they must give to affordable housing, but who technically sees and knows if it is 5%, However, for me, I just believe in the intersectionality of life. I genuinely believe that you can have an assortment and you can create something that is harmonic. I've seen it. I felt super displaced in certain situations and scenarios, but I realized that by actually being there, it was able to create more because it was a blending. There is more, there's a fabric, there's a texture that comes when maybe even seemingly opposites blend and come and collaborate, So for me, it's how do we make sure that the new kind of found footfall and all the rest of it serves those who kind of helped to give it its initial kind of brand, How do we honor that? And for me, working with one of the most significant landlords in the area, who owns Brixton Village and Market Row, he has some development plans of which he has given me he gave me his ear essentially, and I was able to kind of share with him these certain plans to make it house the first Black entrepreneurial ecosystem in the UK. 88% of Black businesses are self-funded. Should never be the case. OPM is almost a non-existent kind of entity in the Black kind of entrepreneurial community. No one knows that you have any access to any money. And even if you do approach those that have access to money, like my now co-founder, did previously before starting the business with me, he had taken part in 10 of the country's 10 top accelerator programs, pitched to over 100 VCs and wasn't able to raise a penny. He owned the patents, had the partnerships in the video. It was his third startups, had the NHS on the line as a client. It was a telediagnostic, bit of tech, timely with the pandemic backdrop. Everything. He was a dream and literally couldn't raise a penny.
And why do you think that was?
He is mixed race.
Right.
With dreads and wasn't born in the UK. Forget about it. That is not let's just be honest.
Yeah.
This is not even if you come from a part of Europe, even venture, the landscape, even coming from Europe, is a disability, let alone your parents like came from African descent. Get the hell out of here. It ain't happening, you know? So essentially that is why like we had to exist. You know, we are a response ultimately. Like, I mean, it is more likely for a black woman to win the lottery on a Saturday night than to get venture capital funding in the United Kingdom.
Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Horrendous, isn't it?
I mean,
it is
a
actually.
horror story. Yeah.
I mean, that's where social mobility becomes the conversation.
Absolutely.
And it isn't the conversation.
No.
You know, that's the issue. What I love about your answer as we sort of come towards the end of the conversation is that, you know, what do you want Brixton to be? You want it to be a melting pot of all different races, cultures. The history of the area needs to stay prevalent as well. But that is the absolute antithesis of being in a gang.
Yeah.
One versus another, us versus you, my group versus your group.
Absolutely.
And if that doesn't sort of complete the circle, I don't know what else does. Amazing. I mean, what an incredible story. And the final thing that I would be wondering if I was listening to this at home, where does regret sit for you? Do you regret the violence? Do you regret the fear, the anger, the sadness, the pain that you've caused other families and that other families have caused to you and yours as a parent now? Because I think as soon as your child is born, that's when you feel true love.
I agree.
And now you imagine your mum seeing you go through everything.
Yeah. I mean, regret is an understatement. Like, I think it brings me deep spiritual pain that I feel like I probably navigate on a day to day. You know, like the moment I always describe it as when I've seen, my son's name's Lion. Yeah, that's the moment I saw Lion's like just his naked bum in that like hospital room, and I just saw him, and I'm like, life is about making life better for you. And when I said you, I meant it as a collective. I mean, like you that are coming after, leave the world in a better way than it was for the posterity, you know? So, I mean, definitely I agree in terms of the love statement and acknowledging and embracing and seeing love in a real way. However, in terms of the regret, like I definitely navigate it on a spiritual level quite deeply. I have regret, but I also have an awareness that nothing happens to me but for me, you know? So, I mean, there's a lot that I would have wanted to have been different, you know? But essentially, if it hadn't been different, I might not be in the situation affording me to be able to share even like today as candidly, you know, to like such an audience, you know? So it's like, absolutely, like live with regret, definitely have many regrets, wish it could have gone a million different ways, you know, but I mean, still very much grateful for what the future can potentially present, you know.
Amazing. We always end our interviews with just a few quick fire questions.
Sweet.
The first one here is the 3 non-negotiable behaviours that you and the people around you need to buy into.
I've got one of my colleagues in the room, so I might as well not lie because they'll go back.
We want the truth.
They won't respect me. I say every day when we go into like, I've kind of toned it down because I've a broken record, but I say everyone must conduct themselves as old, rich, white men. Every response we have, every action we make, every dream we're dreaming, old, rich, white, I mean, complete privilege. You should move.
Isn't that sad though in some ways? Like,
I mean,
why can't you be a cool young black man? And I know you can't.
Yeah.
Because the response on the phone or the loan from the bank or whatever it is won't be the same. But that in itself, like, because that's not you. You're not an old rich white man.
I'm not an old rich white man.
But you have to be that to get where you need to get to. That and in itself is an indictment of this society.
It's quite heavy. Now that you say it, it sounds different when you say it out loud in a different context. Yeah. But I mean, like I literally, and I don't mean it in a way that they should like maybe code switch, but there's a certain level of know that you're entitled to it. Have a certain audacity. Don't shrink, you know, like come across to your own visions and the desire and what we're building here as an old rich white man. Yeah. So that's one thing I tell those that are close to me. That's the first time I got that. What's another thing that I tell those that are close to me? I mean, I say it now. I used to be really good at it. I'm not so good at it anymore. Self-talk is self-love. So good self-talk, you know? So like, I used to always like, if I would catch like someone saying something about them, I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, cut that out. Let's nip that. And they'll be like, oh, it's harmless. I'm like, no, that's very harmful. So that's one bit that's a non-negotiable. And then also, I would say anything that they say that they can't do, I'll just be like, it's available. It's usually my answer, you know, that it is available. You know, it might take a bit more, depending on the compounded disadvantage, you know, it might take a bit more maneuvering, but it's still available, you know. So with enough hustle, you can get there. So yeah, those are the three.
If you could go back to one moment in your life, what would it be and why?
Ooh, to go back to one moment in my life, what would it be and why? I would say the birth of my son. Yeah. Seeing him did a lot. I don't even think I can really, I don't think it's quantifiable almost as to what it actually did, but like it did a lot. It changed my complete trajectory. And that was in terms of what I was going to present and contribute to the world. I feel like the biggest kind of influence on why I am contributing in this way today, in terms of like the vehicles I'm using and the industry I'm in, is because I saw lying in that room. Yeah, that wall.
What does your spirituality do for you?
I mean, in all honesty, it has granted me an ability to forgive, which is huge. To also acknowledge that I am worthy of forgiveness, you know, which is also huge. And it allows me to operate with a metaphysical edge. You know, I believe heavy in manifesting. Like I do like shopping carts, you know, so it allows me to be moved by not what I see, but what I see, essentially. So yeah.
How important is legacy to you?
Legacy, everything. I mean, my ex-wife won't mind me saying this now. That's why I'm not with my ex-wife. It's literally legacy. It means everything to me.
Why are you not with her? Because of legacy?
I mean, that's a longer. We're gonna need the whole next.
You can't give us that little bit and nothing else. Come on.
You know what it is? It's just the fact that I take huge pride, and I believe life is about productivity. Like that is what genuinely motivates me, rather than over connectivity. So I believe that connectivity is a thing also. But productivity for me on a personal level is huge, you know, and to be able
explain the difference between productivity and connectivity.
So in my definition of productivity is like being able to, like on a Plato level, like ideas, yeah? Being able to execute and realize ideas. That's productivity. And connectivity for me is more around not creating ideas, but settling with the idea of who someone else is, you know, and having that kind of exchange, you know. So I'd rather interact with development, you know, on some level. So in the I mean, short way of it, I'm a workaholic. I would prefer that. I got extreme tunnel vision, you know, so those things aren't always like the greatest thing for romantic relationships, you know. So yeah.
That's a very long way of explaining that.
Well, you ended up with a baby, so there must have been a period. Final question, and this is kind of your one last message to everyone that's listened to this podcast. What's the final thing you'd like to leave them with? Your one golden rule to living their own high performance life.
Do you know what? I actually heard it from one of my LPs recently, actually. And we've been very fortunate to have like world-class LPs, yeah. And this guy is a part of one of the kind of probably the most he's in the mix, yeah. But he doesn't fit the archetype slightly, yeah. Chinese guy, just kind of he's got a different approach to it, but he knows his stuff, yeah. And I told him about the grand vision that we have for Brixton, creating those grooves. We've already began, we do activations with the likes of DeepMind and Google, just to kind of give it that kind of fingerprint. And I told him about basically the 5-10 year commitment to this. And he was just like, yeah, no, that 5-year plan is brilliant. The only advice I would say is figure out how to do it in 6 months. And that did really challenge me, and got certain bits in me firing. And then my brain started to kind of look for ways where that can be achieved. And I realized that kind of venture approach, yeah, is what I did on a personal level. Years ago, my whole thing was, how can I make 1 year look like 5? And I got obsessed with 1 year looking like, what does even 5 years look like? I don't know. But whatever in my mind was satisfactory for a 5-year kind of progression, I was not satisfied unless it was done in one, So I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah.
Get it done.
Yeah, get it done.
Amazing. Karl, thank you so much for that hour and a bit to delve into the story that you've shared with us, and so many takeaways and so many lessons for so many people, with, interestingly, love being the recurring theme from start to finish.
Please hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, give us a thumbs up, leave a review, but somehow get involved with the High Performance Podcast and become part of our growing community.